the current user, and then the settings that we're going to do in just a moment that indicate what roles get access to what nodes in our sitemap. Now I have to do several things to set that up, and the first thing we're going to do is to enable sitemap trimming by going over to our web.config, and we're going to add a new section down here. And we're going to add a section of type sitemap, and we're going to specify the default provider as XML sitemap provider. And we're going to set the enable attribute equal to true. Then we're going to add a provider in the providers element. So add that, and the name of our provider is going to be XML sitemap provider. Description equal to default sitemap provider. And the type is going to be equal to system.web.xml sitemap provider. And the sitemap file is going to be equal to web.sitemap. And security trimming enabled will set to true. So that will enable the security trimming on our sitemap. So now we've turned on security trimming, we need to set some access rules, and there's a couple ways you can do that. What we're going to do first is we want to restrict this customer folders here and allow only users in a member role to be able to view the customer menu options. To do that, we're going to go up and run the ASP.NET configuration page. And in here, as I mentioned, I set up ASP.NET membership. And what I've done is created two users, one called administrator, the other called member. And I've assigned some roles to them. For the administrator, I put in the administrator role as well as the member role. And then for the member, they're not in the administrator but are in the member role. So now what we need to do is to create some access rules for our site. So what we can do here is to define access rules for any of the folders in our website. And by default, everyone has access to the site. So what we want to do is then restrict access for certain sections. And as I said, what we want to do is take the customers folder and apply a couple restriction rules here. And there's two things to keep in mind when you create your rules, and they're mentioned here in the text at the top of this wizard page. One is that the rules are applied in the order in which they're listed, and that also they then apply to all the subfolders. So you have to think through carefully how you apply these rules. So what we're going to do for the customers folder is the first rule is we're going to say members are allowed access to this. So we'll set up that rule. And let me go back here. Click the wrong button. There we are in customers. So our first rule is to allow members, and then because we don't want anyone else in the folder, we have to add yet a second rule and say we'll deny all users access to the customers folder. So as I said, this reads from top down in sequence, and what happens in the processing of security trimming is it reads from the top down, and as soon as it finds a match, it then enforces that rule. So it's very important in this case that we put the allow members first and then deny all users second, because what it will do after we're logged in as a member is it'll read the first rule, allow us in, and we'll never get to the second rule. If we were to put the deny all users as the first rule, we would never get in to the customers folder. So now we'll go back to our website and let's test out this rule we've put in place. So we'll start up the home page, and as we can see, the customers menu option is no longer available because we're right now an anonymous user. We haven't logged in. However, we'll use our little login link here, and let's log in to the member user, which is in the member role. So now when we log in as a member, we do have the customer menu options available to us. So how are these access rules applied? Well, what happens is there's a web.config file added to the folder, and there's some rule elements in that. So we'll go over to our customers folder, just refresh it, and you can see that a web.config file was added. We can see that there's an authorization element added with one-to-many allow and deny child elements. It's also possible to have multiple sitemap files and attach them to different navigational controls. So let's add a second sitemap here. And to speed things up, what we'll do is just copy and paste our web.sitemap, and then we'll rename it. We'll call this a special.sitemap. Open that up, and in this one, what we're going to do is just have the about choices, and then what we need to do is go back into our web.config file down to the sitemap section, which we saw a little while ago, and we need to add a second sitemap provider, and we'll call this the special sitemap provider. Change the description. Use the same type, XML sitemap provider. But what we want to do is to point to the special.sitemap file. And we'll leave security trimming enabled. So now let's use this special sitemap provider over here in the Add Customer page. What we'll do is add a new sitemap data source to this page rather than using the sitemap data source 1 from the master page, and we will call this sitemap data source 2 and point the tree view to that sitemap data source, and we'll add the sitemap provider attribute, and we'll point to the special sitemap provider, which we just defined in the web.config file. Now we'll start up the website, and we have to log in as administrator because we have security trimming set for that. Log in, we have customers, we'll go to the Add Customer page, and now you can see that the tree view is using our special sitemap provider because we put just the about choices in that. So that's a way to mix and match sitemap providers and multiple sitemap files attached to different navigational controls. So in summary, we looked at how to create a sitemap file with various sitemap nodes in it. Then we looked at how to attach that sitemap file to different navigational controls, including the menu control, the sitemap path control, and the tree view control using a sitemap data source. We then looked at security, whereby you can use what's called security trimming to limit access to different nodes in your sitemap depending upon what roles the authenticated users are in. And we also looked at how to use multiple sitemap files and attach the different sitemap files to different navigational controls. Hope you enjoyed this video on sitemaps and navigation in ASP.NET. This is Chris Pelz. Thanks for watching the video.